The first night, the sound came like teeth against wood. Soft, steady, deliberate. Clara froze in the half-dark of the farmhouse, brush mid-stroke, the air thick with turpentine and dust. The scratching stopped when she held her breath, then started again, closer this time. She whispered to herself, "Rats," though she knew that wasn't true, because rats don't whisper your name. And when the sound finally came again, slow, rasping, drawn out like a sigh, what it said wasn't just her name. It called her home. The morning after, Clara convinced herself it was a dream. She brewed coffee, opened the windows, and tried to chase away the smell of rot that seemed to cling to the curtains. But every sound, the hum of the fridge, the groan of the pipes, felt alive, deliberate, too intentional. When she found the small pile of plaster dust beneath the wall, she'd heard the whisper from. Her stomach sank. Something had clawed its way closer during the night. That evening, the scratching began again, steady as breathing. Clara pressed her phone against the wall to record it. The sound deepened, shifting in pitch, low, guttural, almost wet. Then came the whisper, clearer now, drawn out and deliberate. It said her name slow and tender, like someone calling her to bed. Unable to sleep, Clara played the recording back. Static filled the room like breath. Then beneath it, soft, faint, unmistakable. A voice whispered again, not just her name this time, but something else. 2 words. Come back. Clara told herself she'd leave in the morning, but as she turned out the lights and stepped toward her bedroom, something behind the walls moved again. Slow, dragging, closer. Then, from the darkness, the whisper came not from the wall, but right behind her ear. By the 3rd night, Clara stopped pretending it wasn't real. She traced the sounds through every room. Her phone clutched in one shaking hand, its red recording light the only pulse in the dark. The whispers followed her from room to room, repeating her name in different tones, sometimes mocking, sometimes pleading. When she whispered back, just once, it answered. The recordings grew stranger each time. Beneath the scratching came voices, multiple, layered, speaking words she couldn't quite understand. One sounded like a woman humming softly through static. Another, deep and broken, whispered in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Clara played them over and over, long after dawn, unable to stop. When Clara finally slept, she dreamed of her grandmother standing in the doorway, still, smiling, her eyes black and shining. The dream felt real enough that Clara reached out to touch her, but when her hand brushed the fabric of the nightgown, it felt like splintered wood. She woke to find her fingertips bleeding. Desperate for answers, Clara searched the attic again. She tore through boxes of old journals, brittle photographs, and yellowed letters. One book stopped her cold. Her grandmother's diary, its spine cracked, its pages filled with notes about the voice in the walls, in her grandmother's uneven scrawl. One entry read, "It knows our names. Don't answer it." That night, she read every word. The deeper she went, the more the handwriting twisted, letters carved into the page as though by shaking hands. In the final entry, her grandmother had written, "It's not in the walls anymore. It's in me." And as Clara read the line aloud, the house answered with a whisper that came from inside her chest. The house stopped pretending to be quiet. Every corner creaked. Every breath of wind seemed to crawl along the walls like a pulse. Clara barely slept now. She painted through the night, her canvases filled with shapes she didn't remember drawing. Each one had the same face. Her grandmother's, mouth open in a scream that never made a sound. The voices changed. No longer only whispers. They spoke in full sentences now, murmuring secrets about her childhood, her fears, her guilt. They used her mother's voice, her eggs, her own. Every wall became a mouth. Every silence, an inhale. The walls began to breathe. When she leaned close, she could feel warm air slipping through the cracks, like sighs against her skin. "One night," she whispered. "What are you?" And the answer came softly, like a lover beneath the sheets. "You." When Elliot called, she ignored him. When he showed up uninvited, she didn't answer the door. He knocked for nearly an hour, shouting her name. Inside, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering softly to the wall as though it were listening. Because it was. And it whispered back, in her grandmother's voice, "Don't let him in." That night, Clara dreamed of the wall opening like a mouth, its tongue made of roots and rot. From within, her grandmother stepped out, her face smooth and wrong, her eyes empty. "You let it in," she whispered, before turning to Ash in Clara's arms. When she woke, her hands were black with soot. Clara stopped trying to ignore it. The walls wanted to be opened. She could feel it now, the constant pulse, the warmth behind the plaster. She fetched a hammer from the shed, her movements calm, almost reverent. When the first strike split the wood, the house exhaled, releasing a smell so foul it nearly dropped her to her knees. Behind the plaster was something older than the house itself, symbols carved into the beams, blackened by time and soot. The wood pulsed faintly beneath her fingertips. She traced one of the runes, and the whisper came again, clearer than it had ever been. Her grandmother's voice saying, "You shouldn't have come back." The smell of rot thickened until she gagged. Then, with one more strike, the wall gave way completely. Behind it was a cavity, small, coffin-shaped, and inside, wrapped in burlap and hair, was something that looked almost human. Clara fell backward, the air gone from her lungs. Her grandmother's rosary hung around the thing's neck. She stumbled backward until she hit the opposite wall. Her chest heaved as whispers poured from the open cavity, layered voices calling her name in harmony. The figure's mouth moved slightly, a dry, crackling sound escaping as its jaw twitched. The voice that spoke wasn't her grandmother's anymore. It was her own. Clara dropped the flashlight and ran. But as she stumbled through the house, every wall whispered her name. Every window pulsed with her reflection. In each pane of glass she passed, her face was older, her eyes black, her smile wrong. When she reached the front door and tried to pull it open, the wood felt warm under her hands, beating with her own pulse. Elliot finally forced his way inside. The house didn't resist him at first, but when he found Clara in the living room, she wasn't herself. Her pale skin seemed to glow from within, her green eyes black, as she murmured in a voice that was not her own. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, shadows crawling over every surface, and the whispers had become commands. Clara raised a hand and the walls shuddered, groaning like a living thing. Elliot stepped forward, trying to speak, but she raised her other hand and the whispers crescendoed. Hundreds of voices speaking at once, each one a memory of him, each one a fear. He staggered back, ears ringing as the floorboards seemed to bend beneath him. "Clara, it's me," Elliot shouted. But she didn't answer. Instead, she smiled faintly, and the voice that came out was layered. Her grandmother's. Hers, the house. "You shouldn't have come," it said. And with that, the floor beneath Elliot's feet shifted, splitting slightly, forcing him to his knees. She began to speak in the whispering chorus herself, words unrecognizable, syllables curling through the air like smoke. Elliot's ears bled. His mind struggled to hold reality together, but Clara didn't falter. She was no longer human. She was the house, and the house was her. The house shifted again, walls groaning and floors tilting as if alive. Clara rose, moving toward Elliot, and the whispering chorus followed her footsteps. "It's time," she said, her own voice layering over the house. Every door slammed shut, every window reflected her, dozens of Claires staring back. And as Elliot screamed, the last light in the house flickered out. Flames licked at the edges of the farmhouse. Clara stood in the center of the living room, smoke curling around her like serpents. The house groaned and shrieked as if resisting its own destruction, but it didn't matter. She knew what she had to do. Every whisper begged her to stop, promising power, love, freedom. But she clenched her jaw and stepped forward. Elliot had not left. He stumbled inside, coughing through the smoke, eyes wide with desperation. "Clara, stop! We can leave!" But she shook her head. "It's already too late," she whispered, the house echoing her words in every corner. She moved toward the center beam, the heart of the house where the carvings and mummified figure had been. The whispers changed tone, no longer pleading, no longer commanding. They sang. A chorus of voices, her grandmother's, hers, the house's, all rising in a terrifying harmony. Clara raised her hands, channeling the energy. She pressed a match to the floorboards at the base of the central beam. The house shrieked, wood twisting and splintering, but she held firm, tears streaming down her soot-blackened face. For a moment she thought she saw her grandmother in the flames, smiling, nodding, urging her forward. Every whisper promised her safety, love, even freedom from all pain. But Clara's jaw tightened. She whispered back to the house, "I choose myself." The words rang in the smoke-filled room, louder than any voice, shaking the house to its foundations. The house began to collapse inward, groaning and shrieking as flames consumed it. Clara felt the heat, the weight, the pulse of the entity trying to cling to her, but she didn't run. She stepped outside, pulling Elliot after her. The farmhouse burned, screaming its fury, and she felt a hollow calm where the whispers had been. The night was quiet for the first time since she had arrived. Clara Hensley stood on the edge of the scorched property, her auburn hair matted with soot, clinging to her pale, freckled face. Her green eyes reflected the glow of embers, wide and wary, haunted, yet strangely serene. Elliot Warren stood a few paces behind, his tall frame hunched, dark gray eyes scanning the ruins of the farmhouse, drenched from the evening rain that had mixed with the smoke. He rubbed his beard absently, trying to make sense of what they had just survived, the shaking of his hands betraying the adrenaline and terror that had yet to settle. Clara's shoulders were stiff, her sweater half-singed, and her breath came in shallow gasps as she surveyed the skeletal remains of the house, remembering every whisper, every pulse of the wood beneath her fingertips. Every moment she had felt herself slip away into the entity that had claimed the walls. Her bare feet were muddy from running through the wet grass, and the distant sound of cracking beams still whispered faintly in her memory, as if the house had left some of its voice lingering in the night air. The air smelled of burnt wood, ash, rain, and a faint sweetness that reminded her inexplicably of her grandmother's old perfume, the scent twisting her stomach with grief and fear. Clara felt the weight of her own survival, the guilt and relief intertwined, knowing she had chosen herself over the entity, over the house, over the whispers that had promised her a release she did not want. Elliot's eyes followed hers, hesitant, terrified that the house might somehow rise again from the ashes, that what they had seen was only a pause in the nightmare. Clara whispered under her breath, her voice low and trembling, "It's over, isn't it?" And Elliot nodded, though his jaw tightened as he tried to suppress a shiver. They stood together, the ruined beams smoldering behind them, smoke curling into the black sky, and for a long moment neither spoke, listening instead to the gentle patter of rain and the far-off echoes of their own survival, their breathing, the soft rustle of leaves, a reminder that life continued even after the house had tried to claim them completely. They moved away from the ruins, walking cautiously across the wet grass, their shoes sinking slightly into mud. Clara's fingers itched from cuts and splinters, a faint scar forming along the knuckles where she had gripped the hammer for hours, smashing walls that had become part of her life, part of her soul. Elliot kept glancing back, shivering despite the mild night, his gray eyes wide and alert for any movement, his mind replaying the way the house had shifted, the unnatural bending of walls, the whispering chorus that had consumed Clara and threatened to consume him as well. Clara's auburn hair fell in damp tendrils across her shoulders, her sweater damp and sticky from smoke and sweat, her pale hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around herself, the smell of ash still clinging to her skin. She glanced at Elliot, noticing his jawline tight, the crease of worry etched deeply into his forehead. "Do you think it's really gone?" she asked, voice low, almost swallowed by the night, her green eyes searching his gray ones for confirmation. Elliot's lips parted, his throat dry, and he shook his head, whispering, "I don't know. Houses like that, they don't die. Not really." Clara exhaled shakily, feeling the weight of truth in his words. The embers behind them pulsed faintly in her memory, as if the fire had not fully consumed the energy within the walls, the lingering whisper of the house still circling in the air around them. She shivered, despite herself, pulling her damp sweater closer, and they continued walking, side by side, leaving the charred skeleton of the farmhouse behind, stepping into the darkness of the fields that stretched toward the forest, feeling the oppressive silence pressing close, listening for any sound that might hint that the entity was still near, lingering, watching, waiting. Hours passed as they walked through the field, the wind carrying the faint scent of ash, burned wood, and something sweeter, something intangible that tugged at Clara's mind. She felt it inside her chest, a soft whisper, almost familiar, brushing against her thoughts. Her green eyes narrowed, scanning the dark forest that loomed ahead, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows across the wet ground. Elliot's footsteps were heavy beside her, gray eyes darting to every dark shape, the faint moonlight catching the wet strands of his hair. Clara could feel her heartbeat in her throat, slow and heavy, synchronized with the memory of the house's pulse, and she shivered involuntarily. She tried to shake the sensation, to tell herself it was nothing, yet the whisper grew clearer for the first time outside the house, a soft, coaxing voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Clara." It breathed, barely audible, curling through the cool night air like smoke. Familiar, intimate, impossible. She froze, her pale hands clenching at her sides, auburn hair clinging damp to her neck, sweat prickling her skin despite the cold. Elliot noticed immediately, stepping closer, voice urgent. "What is it? What did you hear?" Her lips parted, ready to answer, but the sound fled, leaving only the memory of warmth, of presence, of a voice she shouldn't have recognized. She swallowed hard, forcing her trembling breath back into control, her green eyes meeting his gray ones with unspoken fear, and yet a strange resolve, as if she had understood something essential in that fleeting whisper. The field stretched endlessly before them, the dark forest looming like a sentinel. Clara Hensley paused, chest heaving, auburn hair plastered to her forehead and neck, pale skin streaked with soot and ash from the farmhouse fire, green eyes wide and alert. Elliot Warren stood beside her, gray eyes scanning the shadows, jacket damp from the persistent mist, shoes squelching in the mud. The faint wind carried an echo of the whispers from the house, soft, teasing, impossible to locate. Clara felt it, as a vibration in her chest, a subtle pressure behind her ribs, warm and intimate, like breath curling through her blood. Her knuckles were scraped and bruised from gripping walls, hammers, and door frames in the house, but now they twitched almost compulsively, responding to a sound only she could feel. Elliot glanced at her, voice low and trembling. "Clara, are you?" She shook her head, lips parting to speak but stopping. The whisper came again, clearer, a sibilant, elongated Clara, coming from no single direction, curling around them like smoke, brushing against their ears and skin. She flinched, looking around wildly, auburn strands falling into her eyes, and Elliot's heart pounded as he realized it was not coming from the trees, not from the ground, not from the air. It was inside her chest, inside the very space between them. She tried to step forward, feel her footing, but the ground seemed to shift slightly beneath her. mud soft and yielding. She pressed her hands to her temples, forcing herself to breathe, green eyes narrowing in defiance. Elliot stepped closer, voice urgent. Clara is gone. Just let it go. Come back to me. She swallowed hard, the whisper curling through her mind, and for the first time since the house had claimed her, she understood the final truth. The entity had never wanted the house. It had wanted her fear, her guilt, her memory, her soul. She exhaled slowly, fists unclenching, auburn hair falling over her shoulders, and whispered under her breath, trembling but resolute, I'm still me. They reached the edge of the forest and stopped, exhausted, rain mixing with sweat and ash on their skin. Clara Hensley breathed slowly, feeling her chest rise and fall as the whisper ebbed, leaving only the faintest echo, a memory of warmth and fear intertwined. Her auburn hair clung to her neck, pale skin still marked with soot and streaks of dried blood. Elliot Warren placed a tentative hand on her shoulder, gray eyes scanning the forest's edge, then meeting her green eyes. The air smelled of wet earth, ash, and a faint, impossible perfume, the last vestige of the entity that had consumed the house and nearly consumed her. Clara's lips parted, voice barely audible. It's over. I think it's finally over. Behind them, the field was silent, only the distant cracking of charred beams settling in the ruins they had left behind. Yet, when she turned her gaze backward, the memory of the house lingered in the mind's eye, the walls breathing, the whispers repeating her name, the blackened eyes of her grandmother peering from every shadow. She shivered involuntarily, auburn hair sticking to her sweat-dampened face, but Elliot squeezed her hand gently, grounding her in the present. The whisper returned, softer than before, almost gentle, curling through the night air like a fading echo. Clara. She flinched, green eyes widening, but this time it was not threatening, only a reminder, a last breath of the sea. Darkness she had survived, and as she exhaled, the wind carried the faintest whisper away, leaving only silence. Clara took Elliot's hand, and together they walked into the night, leaving the house, the entity, and every lingering shadow behind. Yet, deep inside her chest, where the whisper had lived, she could feel the faintest pulse of memory, a reminder that some names, some voices, never truly fade.